My name is Steve Viachica. I'm an associate professor of instructional and performance technology here at Boise State University. We live in troubled economic times. Executives and other decision makers now look at all parts of their organizations, including the training function, and they ask, what have you done for me lately? One way to answer that question is to tell them about the value their investment in training has produced for the organization. How do we do that? One approach is the 4-level Kirkpatrick evaluation model. It's not every day we get to hear about the model from the family that created it and now advances its use. I'm honored to introduce our guest for this webinar, Dr. Jim Kirkpatrick, Senior Consultant for Kirkpatrick Partners. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Steve. My pleasure to be here. As I said, it's my pleasure to be here. You guys, I assume you're hearing me okay, unless someone tells me not. It's an unusual opportunity for me to talk to students, and I look forward to it. Usually I'm talking to business people and training professionals, so it's great to be talking to people that are on the learning side of things. There, we okay there?
Very well.
Good. I'm envious of you guys. I started in different careers, and my father, Don, would talk about the 4 levels different times and lots of times. I never paid too much attention to it, as I was a clinical psychologist and game warden and teacher and so forth, so I was always afraid he was going to ask me, Jim, can you tell me what the 4 levels are? And until about 15 years ago, I knew a couple of the words, but I wasn't sure what order they were in or anything. Until I decided to move from clinical work to corporate work and went to a luncheon where he was speaking, and I started taking some notes on a napkin. That was about 15 years ago, and since then I've seen the potential power of the 4 levels. I've seen where they've been and have a good tutor, of course, with Don, and yet see where they need to go. And that's what I'm going to be talking to you guys about, and I have a feeling that you're going to see a discrepancy between some of the things that I tell you and some of the things that you're reading in our books or other books about the 4 levels or about evaluation. Hopefully it won't be so much discrepancy, but just advancement. And let me just start with this slide here. I was with my father a few months ago. Wendy, my wife, and I were visiting him up in Milwaukee, and I had an article. I said, Dad, I want you to listen to this quote that I have. I made it all formal and stuff, and he's listening, and it says, training directors might be well advised to take the initiative and evaluate their programs before the day of reckoning arrives. And he said, oh, that's pretty impressive. I said, you like that? He said, yeah, that's pretty good. I said, yeah, what do you like about it? He said, well, it's very timely, this day of reckoning. We are really under the gun. And I said, he said, Jim, did you write that? And I said, no, you did. He said, I did? I said, yeah, you wrote it in an article called Techniques for Evaluating Training Programs. He said, I don't remember. I said, well, it was published in an ASTD journal, a November issue. He said, I still don't remember. I said, well, we'll give you a break because you wrote those words in 1959. And it is my contention and the contention of Kirkpatrick Partners and our affiliates and ambassadors that one of the reasons the training industry is in the pickle that it's in is because we have not heeded these words over the last 15 years. And the main difference I'm going to be talking to you about is the difference between effective training and training effectiveness. And again, it's my contention that we have been focusing for 50 years on delivering effective training programs, and that we believe our task has been to design, develop, and deliver training, and that is one of the main reasons why we are on trial. And Wendy and I just published a book called Training on Trial, and it came out, I think, last week. And the contention here is that we are being charged with incurring costs that exceed the value to the business. or at least if the costs are not in excess, we have failed to demonstrate, as Don mentioned in 1959, we failed to demonstrate the value that we are delivering to the business. Who's being charged? Well, training industry, OD, anybody associated with training and development is being charged with this from one perspective or another. And who is it that's charging us? Well, for those of us who work for corporations, our internal business partners, our stakeholders. For those of us who are consultants, our external clients are saying, show me the money, show me the value. We're paying you a lot. What are you delivering to us? And then, of course, the business world in general is charging us. And I think one of the problems is for many, many decades, we've had a free pass. And the business people have not charged us with having to demonstrate our value like they do every other kind of business unit. So because we are in training and human resources and development, we are seen as adding value just because of the nature of the work that we do. And unfortunately, they have believed that, and we have believed that, and it is no longer true. No longer is there a free pass. We now have to demonstrate our value, and to a large degree, we don't know how to do it. Now, I can't say we because I do know how to do it, and that's why I'm on the phone here with you, because we have worked hard over the last year and a half to modify my father's model to a place where it is now not just about improving training programs, but it's about creating a whole business partnership initiative that is going to not only create value but demonstrate value to the business. So how do we know we're being charged? There's I apologize for the picture. That's supposed to represent a CEO. But here are some of the words that we hear. We'd like you to show us your ROI. You guys are going to be hearing those words if you haven't already. We know you run a lot of programs and seem quite busy. Why are so many good people leaving us? This is one of the things that I really want to emphasize with you, and that is for so long, trainers, learning professionals of all calibers believe that the value comes with activity. I was working with a company on the East Coast a while back, and I said, how do you demonstrate your value to the business? What evidence do you use? They said, well, we use our smile sheet scores. We have 4.8 out of 5. We use our pre and post tests, and we use the number of people that participate in our programs. And they took me to a counter that they had in one of their rooms. They said, look at this. They had 5 or 6 different course catalogs from various years, and they showed me how each year the course catalog and the course offerings got thicker and more. And the really wonderful news is from 2007 to 2008, the catalog went from black and white to color. That was their evidence for their value that they're adding to the business. And it in a way, it shocked me, but in a way, it is so common that we believe that our activity and our efforts at training and learning is evidence enough, and it isn't. They're asking for more. They're asking for efforts in revenue-producing activities. They don't think we're revenue-producing. They think we're cost centers. We hear the words, we're going to put that on hold, or we've decided to make some cuts. There are tens of thousands of trainers that are out of work now that weren't 2 years ago, and I think one of the main reasons is because they have failed to demonstrate their value. So in a sense, I think we are guilty. One of the main reasons is what I just mentioned, is that we have been believing that the activity that we're doing constitutes significant value, and yet there are better ways to demonstrate value that I'll be going over with you guys here in just these few minutes. So what do we have to do to be found not guilty? The main thing is we need to extend our role beyond the traditional definitions of learning. I get so tired of hearing about closing the skills gaps and a learning organization and learning objectives and learning functions and the learning industry. If we think that that's our job, we're in trouble, and the day of reckoning will come and go for us. We need to be seen as performance and impact and contributors to the business rather than believing that our job stops when the computer is turned off and we've used all our instructional design methods and techniques and technology, or when the door closes and the students leave for going back to their real jobs. We need to extend our role into the business, our expertise with the business language and the business needs and the business people. We need to become involved outside our comfort zone of design, develop, and deliver. We need to then be influencing the leveraging of training rather than just believing that training in and of itself is creating significant value. And I know there's a lot of controversy about that, and I make quite a few enemies, but the truth of it is that training in and of itself delivers an insignificant amount of value to the business for the simple fact of the low percent that people actually apply what they've learned without additional performance support methods. So we need to get out of the mindset that because we're delivering training, it will automatically develop and deliver value. It gives us about 15%, as I'm going to show you here in a little while. So we want to get out of the mindset that training is the answer, training is the value. It's the foundation, and it's the cornerstone, but there's some additional things that need to happen before we're able to create significant impact and demonstrate our value in terms of business partnership rather than just training. As I'm sitting here, I'm sitting in St. Louis. I don't know if you guys have snow up there. I would imagine that you do. We have a lot here. Just came last night, and I'm looking out at my sidewalk from my office here, and I can't see what you see on the screen here because there's snow over the top of it. But every time we walk out to go to our car or for a walk, we see this. In 1995, KPH, whoever that is, carved their initials in our sidewalk. Back then, in 1995, the cement was wet. Right now, the cement is dry other than snow on top of it. But the good news in all this, the good news despite the fact that training is on trial, is that we have never had a better opportunity to create and demonstrate value to the business. Business leaders and executives the world over are looking to us for answers on how do we get out of the financial and economic mess we're in, how can we create more value, how can we engage employees, how can we improve retention of top talent. And the good news is the cement is wet, and we can really create a lot of value and almost rewrite our legacy and our definition of our industry. Well, who will take our case if we're on trial? There's dear old Dad. He will take our case through his 4 levels. All right, let me just review them real quick. Those of you who study them probably know what they are as well as I do, but for those that don't, let me just quickly go through. Level 1 is reaction, and there's a picture of some people hopefully reacting positively to training. Now let me tell you one thing about reaction. The literature says it's about customer satisfaction. In a sense it is, but to me there's too much emphasis on are the participants happy with us? Are they pleased with our presentations and our slides and our coffee and our venues and our methodologies? Level 1 should be more about the participant. It should be about their engagement and distractions, and to what degree they think the material will be helpful, and to what degree they're confident that they can use it, and to what degree they're committed to applying what they learned. Instead, in an arrogant fashion, we've made it too much about us. In fact, Wendy and I wrote an article a year or so ago called New World Level 1, where we took all the typical Level 1 reaction questions that seem to be about us, and we flipped them over and made them about the participants. So if anybody's interested in that, just get on our website. We'll give you information at the end for how to register and get those and other articles. And that one in particular, I think, is something that is an easy fix in converting your questions to learner-centered rather than trainer-centered. So level 1 is reaction, level 2 is learning, to what degree do participants acquire knowledge, skills, and attitudes? I can give you a little tip right at this point that is no extra charge, and that is I think that we have fallen a bit short in our efforts with Level 2. Specifically, I don't think that we have, as an industry, really gotten participants to what I call the door of Level 3. Level 3 is on-the-job application. I think we've put too much thinking into the knowledge and skills and believing that if somebody is knowledgeable and they can demonstrate the skills in a controlled environment, they will be able to go through that door and do the same in their world of work. And unfortunately, that is just not the case in a lot of situations. What we need to be dealing with in addition to knowledge and skills, and this certainly could be covered under the word attitude, is the confidence that they have to go and perform the skill in real life, and the commitment that they intend to try. If we stop at knowledge and skills and general attitudes about customers and the company, they are 3 steps short of the door and no telling what's on the other side. So we need to prepare them. We need to talk about their apprehensions about what's over there. We need to help remove barriers and help put into place the support networks that will help them apply what they've learned. So that's my 2 cents worth on Level 2 learning, where I think we can make some improvements. Now, of course, the Level 1 and Level 2 don't do anybody much good unless we get to Level 3, and that is on-the-job behavior. And that is the extent to which participants apply what they've learned on the job. And it's an amazing percent, a low percent of companies that actually find good methods of evaluating that. And to me, it's just it's kind of like the elephant on the table. If you're not evaluating at Level 3 to find out to what extent people are applying what they've learned, and if they're not, why not? How can there possibly be targeted intervention to fix those problems? You know, we need to be taking our mission-critical programs, our mission-critical behaviors, and evaluating those at Level 3 to answer 3 critical questions. To what degree? If not, why not? And if so, why? You know, we need to know what are the reinforcers and what we call the drivers that are leading people to perform their jobs as they've learned. And if not, we need to find out why not so that we can fix it. Otherwise, we will never get to Level 4. The problem here, of course, is that the learning industry believes our job is Level 1 and Level 2, design, develop, and deliver. And the business leaders and managers of the world believe their job is Level 4. So guess what gets left behind is no man's land and the missing link right there, Level 3. And the truth of it is that even though it's the responsibility of business to, you know, drive Level 3 as far as the coaching and performance management and so forth, we, I think, are called upon to make it as easy for them as possible and to be the directors of these Level 3 efforts in order to get to Level 4. Here's a couple pictures. Wendy and I were in Greece doing some training there last summer, and we saw these 2 islands, and it just looked to me like this represents, in a negative way, training on the left and the business on the right. And if you'll notice, there's a little sailboat there that goes back and forth and ferries people and participants from the business side to training. And then when they've got their training and their certificate and their pre- and post-test scores, then they take the little boat back to their real jobs. And unfortunately, there's too much of this. This is not what we call a business partnership model. This is the old training model as opposed to the new Kirkpatrick Business Partnership model. And the managers too often believe that training is separate from value. The participants don't see the connection, and even ourselves, at times, we don't see the connection, believing that we are separate and our job is to deliver training. Now, the good news is we came around the corner with our little boat ride there and saw a better example of the business partnership model. Training on the left, business on the right, and notice, at least with the tide the way it is here, we've got good access here for the learning leaders to cross over, become strategic business partners, doing needs assessment, coaching, creating job aids, creating enthusiasm, working at level 3 over there to ensure that they're getting good application, and also the business people and the managers and the supervisors, the employees have easy access to come over to the training world, realizing that they are together and they're working towards the same things. And the only way we are going to get significant return on the expectations and the investment of the business is through this business partnership model. All right, let's take a couple depositions here, as long as we're on trial and we're in a civil courtroom here. I was in Malaysia, maybe 9 months ago, and doing a workshop, and I was staying at a hotel, and there was a guy standing out in front washing windows. And I was waiting for a taxi. I wasn't sure I was in the right place, so I asked him, I said, sir, can you tell me if the taxi stops here? He said, I don't know, while he kept washing his windows. And I said, do you know if I could call to get a taxi? He said, I don't know. I said, is there anyone inside that could maybe help me? He said, why don't you go in and find out? Well, I got a little ticked at that point, and not only did I take his picture after I'd walked away, but I asked him, what's your job here at the hotel? Not surprisingly, he said, I'm a window washer, and kept his work going. Now, as I said, I took his picture. I wasn't sure why. I'm always taking pictures hoping to use them as metaphors, but I found out the next day why I did. I was working in a country called Brunei, north of Malaysia, working with a cable company, and I looked out the window and saw this guy washing windows. And unfortunately, I hadn't learned my lesson of minding my own business from the day before, so during break I went out and talked to him. And I got down to where he was working, and he hopped off his little step ladder, and he said, how may I help you? I said, I'm just wondering what you're doing. He said, well, I'm washing windows right now. He said, by the way, my name is Chai, and what's your name? I said, it's Dr. Kirkpatrick. He said, oh, how are you finding your stay here at the Premier Resort? I said, well, I'm enjoying it very much. He said, how have you found the food? I said, good. He said, how about blankets and pillows? Do you have enough? I said, yeah, everything is actually fine. I said, why do you ask? He said, well, I just like to make that part of my job. And I said, by the way, what is your job? And he very proudly said, I'm part of a team that creates great experiences for our guests. Well, my jaw dropped, and then when I picked it back up, I asked him a few questions. I said, how is it that you came to answer my question the way that you did? And at no surprise, he talked about his onboarding and his orientation program at the Premier Resort here about a year ago. Talked about how they talked about culture and value and how he was valued, and talked about the kind of training and encouragement and coaching that he was going to get to ensure that he wasn't just learning a skill, but that he was learning a skill in order to perform a job, in order to be successful, in order to make a contribution to his company. Talked about the training much the same way, and the coaching and reinforcement. And then something interesting happened. As I was walking away to go back to my class, he said, oh, Dr. Jim, would you please tell the people back in America about the Brunei, our Premier Resort here in Brunei? I said, I'd be glad to. And then he said, would you also tell them about the country of Brunei? So this guy, for some reason, not only believes he's an ambassador for his company, but he's an ambassador for his country. And then the question comes up, why such a difference, and what do you want your workforce to look like? And I use this example, with working with senior executives and training leaders, and of course they say, oh, we want the Brunei window washer, who he's now become known as. And I say, why would you like an army of Brunei window washers? They say, well, just think of the brand, and think of the customer satisfaction, and think of the retention and the promotion and the development of people, and the PR for our company and our country. And then you know what that leads into? It leads into a discussion of level of effort. Training in and of itself will give you the unknown window washer, because I never did find out his name, poor guy. He may not even know that there's a bigger world of work out there. But it's going to take more than training to create an army or an individual as the Brunei window washer. It's going to take the business partnership model of the reinforcement and the recognition and reminding him that he is there not just to take a boat ride across between the two islands to go to training as a vacation or a holiday, but he's there in order to learn, to network with new colleagues, in order to perform his job effectively, to be successful, to expand his career options, and make a contribution to the organization. That's the level of effort. That's the business partnership model that Kirkpatrick is now putting our flag in the ground as opposed to just training programs. Let me share with you 5 principles that you will not read in your textbooks. The last textbook, my father and I, a book that we wrote together, we wrote one I think in 05, 06, and 07. You know, we start to talk about chain of evidence, but only in the recent writings of that Wendy and I have written, Training on Trial and Kirkpatrick Then and Now, plus numerous articles and white papers, are we really promoting the Kirkpatrick Business Partnership model, and we're kind of pulling the veil off it. But here are the 5 principles that if somebody says, what does Kirkpatrick stand for in 2010, you can tell them. One is, the end is the beginning. Training does not drive this bus. You know, we don't want the tail wagging the dog anymore. We need, when an executive or a group of business partners ask us for a leadership program, we don't just run to the shelf and pull one off and deliver it. We have to find out what's the business need or opportunity, what are their expectations for this initiative, and make sure you use the word initiative so that they don't believe that training in and of itself will create all the value they need. This is going to be a major initiative with a lot of components. And then, the important question you have to ask them is, what will success look like to you? We need to find out ultimately in behavioral or observable, measurable terms, what will success look like so that we know what this effort is supposed to accomplish. And the good news there is it really helps us target our training and target our evaluation and target our reinforcement because we know what's expected of us. Like American Express commercial, don't leave home without it. I was working with a healthcare agency, and their new directive for 2009 was drive to excellence. Well, when the learning leaders and I tried to find out what they meant by that, they said, well, we just mean excellence in all we do, in our parking lots and in our X-ray techs and in our bedside manner. And then we asked them, what will success look like? How will we know what it is that we're supposed to help accomplish? And finally, they got so frustrated with me, they said, we'll know it when we see it. How would you like to be on the responsible side of a training initiative that they'll know it when they see it? You have no choice but to throw an armada of programs and techniques at the whole of the workforce in hopes that somehow you're going to hit something against the wall that's going to stick and create value. That's why the end is the beginning. What will success look like can really help you target your efforts towards leading to what we call ROE. And speaking of what success will look like, I believe that this new business partnership model will be successful when people are talking about ROE instead of ROI. ROI being a kind of a financial term. Why we use ROE instead is that we want to, again, as I said before, we want to determine what the expectations are of our stakeholders in whatever form is most meaningful to them, whether it's business metrics or HR metrics, revenue, cost savings, attrition, brand recognition, whatever it is. And then it is our job to do what we can to develop training, deliver training, and a reinforcement network that will create a return on their expectations. So that's why we believe ROE is the ultimate indicator of success. And one of the things that we differ from some of the other evaluation theories is we don't make any attempt to try and isolate the impact of training. Instead, we're trying to demonstrate the full power of the business partnership model that includes the trainers and the administration people and the learning experts on one side, and the supervisors and the managers and the admins and the participants and the executives and HR and IT and everyone else, as we all work together to create the value, and then we can all share in the celebration of creating this value as we demonstrate it. Third, business partnership is the key. I think I just got done saying that. Rather than training, it's going to lead to enough significant value on its own. We really need to leverage the entire business partnership. Value must be created first. A lot of that comes from the magic at level 3. Levels 1 and 2 are the foundation. Level 3 is the magic. And the truth of it is, if we do a good job at 1, 2, and 3, level 4 generally takes care of itself. So value being created here is especially significant at levels 1 and 2 when we are targeting our training to meet the needs of the behaviors and what success will look like to our stakeholders rather than what we think they need to be trained in. So targeted training and the kind of reinforcement, what we call drivers of the processes, systems, and actions that will help increase the likelihood that people apply what they've learned is going to create the value. Then and only then are we in a good position to be able to demonstrate that value through what we call a chain of evidence that connects the islands, that links the 4 levels to show the power of all the efforts. Do we give them proof? No, because we're not trying to isolate, and we don't believe that it's very feasible to isolate because there's so many variables. But we are going with the civil courtroom metaphor here, preponderance of evidence that our training and the learning that goes on and the behavior change with all the other components of reinforcement and recognition and accountability will create value, and we give credit where credit is due. That's different than I think what you perhaps are reading or hearing about Kirkpatrick. Now here's some added ammunition that tells us that we need to change our ways and our definition. Rob Brinkerhoff conducted a study with the help of Josh Burson a year and a half ago and found that when people leave the classroom or in e-learning and they go to their jobs without the benefit of reinforcement or coaching, 15% did not even try what they learned, 70% tried the new skills, failed, and went back to what they did before, and only 15% have found the wherewithal with their own motivation and their own discipline to actually sustain the new behaviors. Now, to me, that says training is delivering 15% of the power towards ROE. That's not good enough. Then we look at an ASTD study in their State of the Industry Report 2006 that looked at programs and initiatives that were designed to create positive results that didn't. What were the causes? And we see that in 20% of the case, the cause came primarily from people not being selected properly for the training, expectations not being clear, no pre-work, not doing pre-testing where indicated. 10% of the problem came from faulty training, the design, develop, and delivering of the training programs where we're using some type of faulty method where we're not, the right content, or they don't like our coffee or whatever it is. But a full 70% comes from after the training, the formal training is over in the environment, and that comes from 2 major sources. One is the managers and supervisors did not provide the proper environment of support and accountability that would encourage the application of what they learned, and second of all would be the lack of opportunity and resources for people to actually use what they've learned. Therefore, they lose it. Therefore, it doesn't happen, and they go back to their old ways. So my contention here, and the Kirkpatrick contention, Don, Wendy, and the rest of us, are that we need to become experts, not just in the green, but also in the blue and the yellow, and figure out ways to help prepare the participants ahead of time, and especially how to create that follow-through that is going to increase the transfer of learning to behavior. All right, there are been a number of studies. Most recently, ASTD has done a good work called Valuing the Value of Evaluation, and determined that as much as 85%, between 75 and 85% of our resources we are spending in the first two levels as far as design, develop, and deliver, and we're spending about 10% in the pre-work and about 5% in the follow-up. So look at how this plays out together. We're spending 85% of our time in 10% of the problem and 15% of the power. And to me, that's pretty much what tells us we need to get involved with the entire pie here, the three colors rather than the one color. Even though we can't control what happens largely in yellow and blue, we can influence it. But I think that whole control issue is why we spend the majority of our time where we're comfortable in the green area. So that's a challenge for you now that you're in the world of learning, on how to expand your thinking towards being a complete strategic business partner rather than rather than the learning professional. And I think that the key here is to become experts in support and accountability. A book I wrote a couple years ago called Transferring Learning to Behavior really talked about these two major forces that will help people get across the gap, what we call the Great Divide of Level 2 and Level 3. And then ultimately we want to be able to demonstrate the value of not just training, but the entire business partnership model, of which training is a foundation. And we do that through a chain of evidence where we are collecting data and information along the way with these initiatives, keeping in mind that the data, objective data is important, but we also need to keep in mind the power of the testimonials when we don't have data, or when we want to give examples of enriched and changed lives, and appreciative people that see the power in the training, see the power in the reinforcement, the recognition, and the accountability, and the results that it produces. So one of the things I want to make sure you also realize here is we call New World Level 3. No longer do we limit Level 3 to the behaviors of the participants, but we also believe strongly in monitoring the drivers, the coaching, the mentoring, the Level 3 evaluation, the accountability, the recognition, the role modeling, the refresher training that we do, all those things that act to drive the critical behaviors to occur. We now encourage people to monitor both the behaviors and the drivers to make sure that this operates as an early warning detection system. If some of those fall below standard, we have time to lift them up back into standard and compliance, because that is the only way we are going to get significant ROE to go to our stakeholders with, to rewrite the definition of who we are. So there's lots of, I've given you kind of the basics here. There's lots of stories behind this. There's additional information that you can get from KirkpatrickPartners.com. My wife developed this company a while back, and fortunately the first two people she invited to join with her was my father and myself. So we formed the backbone of this company, but we are, we work with alliances and partners, and our mission is to deliver the message to where people actually apply and benefit from what we call the business partnership model rather than the training model. That's what we're all about. That's what I hope you got the message. That's what I hope you keep in mind as you move forward with your learning and your performance. And now, if you have some questions, we've got a little time that I'd be glad to see if I can answer for you.
If you have a question and a mic, you can click on the little icon to raise your hand, and we'll give you the microphone and you can ask your question. Or you can type a question and we'll ask Dr. Kirkpatrick for you. I have a question to get started with, and that is, when you embrace this idea of a return on expectation and the notion that we need to provide impacts of value, that really involves being able to work with decision makers to specify what that success story is going to look like. If your training department is typically viewed as nothing more than an order taker who merely responds to requests for training, sometimes those are well-intentioned and ill-informed requests for training, what strategies can you share to move up the sponsorship food chain so you can have these ROE conversations?
Great question, and I think the best way to answer that is through a recent example. One of the organizations we have worked with is the Internal Revenue Service, and one of the managers told me recently that he embraces this. He has read our Kirkpatrick Then and Now book, which outlines, the new model, and he said that he believed that the IRS in his area had been using a training model, and a lot of their goals and objectives were not being met from a business side. So he was going to go to these executives and say, I've got a new way. I want you to give me a chance to try it. So he did. He had it all spelled out as a business case for the business partnership model. He had to go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 executives before he got one of them to say, that's very interesting. I'll give you a chance to try it. You select the program to as a pilot. You try it, but I'm going to be watching every move you make, and if I see that it is starting to falter, I'm going to pull the plug on it. So this guy by the name of Rob Lavenway, he said okay, and he had enough confidence, and he knew how to do it, that he pulled it off. He had a whole new way of doing the training and the reinforcement that saved the company money by not being so heavy on the instructor-led part. It was targeted, the reinforcement was targeted, and for the first time in years, they accomplished the 5 expectations, the specific corporate objectives for that initiative. And you know what happened then? The other 6 came around, these other 6 executives came around and said, what did you do, and can you teach us to do it? And my suggestion there lies in that story, in that rather than trying to create a wave that's going to wash across these, between the 2 islands, look until you find one executive that's in a position of power enough that will give you a chance to select what we call a showcase program. And using our training on trial metaphor, it's like, what is the landmark case that you can take before the court, the Supreme Court if possible, to make that difference, and run the program. Make sure that you have the level 3 drivers in place that will encourage the application, which will bring about the ROE, and then, like a good attorney does or a team of lawyers goes before the jury, you present it in a compelling manner with the data and evidence. That's the best suggestion I have, and we've seen that a number of times with Booz Allen Hamilton, seen it with L'Oreal in Paris, seen it with Ingersoll Rand and Harley-Davidson, of where they have gotten the opportunity to run a pilot, make sure it works, make sure it's a program that is of high executive interest and investment and potential, that will get the attraction, that will get the attention of what we call the corporate jury, and then be careful, because then they're going to say, can you do more of this? But that's a good problem to have. That's the best suggestion I have. The other would be to share, stories of the Brunei window washer or similar stories, or show them the data, that, and especially don't talk about skills gaps and learning, all this stuff that they don't really care about. Talk about execution of their strategy, because level 3 is where execution happens, and you're going to be talking about leveraging learning to help execute strategy through the business partnership model that will get them their return. So I think those are just some suggestions I have.
Thank you. Linda Urban has posted a question that reads, for those of us who develop training for external customers, in other words, we don't work for the customer who uses the training, how can we add elements in our training that encourage managers and executives to provide support around it?
Well, we first have to make the most difficult challenge in all this is the art. You know, the science of this, of the, you know, the 4 levels and the templates and samples is not difficult at all. It's making the business case, and I think that's what you're getting at here, even with your first question. We have to somehow make the business case that the more that people apply the training that we provide, the more likely the level 4 results will occur. So therefore, we want to offer them some job aids and some additional consulting, you know, some level 3 evaluation tools that will help to increase the likelihood and maximize what we call the training effectiveness, you know, by increasing the transfer of learning to behavior, selling them on the idea that will increase the ROE, and also making it easy by providing some methods to do that. Linda, I hope that helps.
And she says, thank you, yes.
Oh, good.
One of the things that I've noticed in my experience is that a lot of times when you ask people more about what they have in mind or what they do for level 2 evaluation, you see this disconnect between people that look at level 2 as multiple choice tests that almost, you know, work on a Jeopardy format, and then they, you know, have some sort of forlorn hope that that's going to transfer to the job, even though the assessment had nothing to do with the job itself.
Oh, you're killing me. Yeah.
Is that something you've seen as well? And what do you tell people when you find out that they're doing this?
Well, I tell them, and I hope you guys take this right, that what they're doing is kind of an old throwback to higher education, you know, believing that the job of the professor is to deliver the information and the skills and to get good student feedback so that they don't get called by the dean. I mean, I know, I've been in that environment working with teaching MBA students, and I think what I want to say is we're spending too much time and too much effort on level 2 when, you know, so concerned about pre and post tests and believing that knowledge is the ultimate power when it's only the lowest tier of Bloom's taxonomy, when we should be looking at issues of credibility, you know, of what is the jury going to find credible evidence. And a lot of times we provide them with evidence of pre and post test scores and every kind of manner of level 2 assessment. And you know what they ultimately say often? We don't care. We trust you that people are learning, and we'd like to see the methods that you're using, particularly during programs that will ensure that the learning is happening, but get to the point. Get to the level 3 and the level 4, and stop trying to demonstrate your value on 1 and 2, because we'll give you that one. You give us 3 and 4. And that's what I tell them is to get out of the mindset that 1 and 2 are the ultimate in evidence. They're the foundation, but the executives of the world are not impressed anymore.
I'm glad to hear that.
Oh, I hope. Okay, I thought I didn't want to make anybody mad there. I know, you know, I got to tell you one thing that's so interesting, that we get a lot of people from secondary education, from universities and colleges, that come to us and they say, oh, we love this model, we're enthused about it, you know, we want to apply this in our organization, you know, both in how we train our students and how we work internally, and they go away enthused, and we never hear from them again. And you know, sometimes we follow up, but I just think that's a real tough code to crack, and I hope you guys are some of the early ones to do it, you know, and to you know, help move this massive stalled tradition of what education is, beyond the classroom. And if you do it, you'll surely have a lot to contribute to the industry.
Agreed. Diane Weir asks, have you seen that the learning professional now needs to invest more of their own preparation in this type of model? For example, do we need to spend more time learning about the business, not just the content we're going to train on?
Oh, you're asking me?
Yes.
Well, I would say absolutely, and that's what I mean by our expertise in the area of business so that we can talk the language. How many times I've seen people go and talk to, to the business leaders about level 1 and level 2, and they go, what's that? Or they talk about, the skills gap, and we talk about things that we have become so accustomed to talking about and think is important, and we get glazed over looks. We need to be speaking the language of their needs. And one other thing that you mentioned earlier that's so important, if you think you can take a blank tablet and go in and ask an executive or a group, hey, what are your expectations and what will success look like? Usually they don't know. So that's where we have to have our consultant hat on and have some ideas and be able to say, well, here are some things that we think it could deliver. Which of these might be most meaningful to you? Because oftentimes they say we want a leadership program. You ask them why. They'll say, so that we can have better leaders, so that we can have all our leaders trained, or so we can, I read Covey's book. Let's all follow the 7 habits. And we have to ask the question, in order to what? So we have all our leaders trained. In order to what? What is the business impact that is supposed to lead to? If we have an army of Brunei window washers or an army of trained leaders, what will it give us? That will help us because you give us some targets that we can really sink our teeth into and make sure that we are effectively and efficiently delivering training and reinforcement because we know what you're looking for.
And you got a hooray from Diane. Also
really?
from yes.
Oh, that's good.
Also from me, I find it interesting that in my career I've seen a lot of people who kind of feel very insulated in that training function. And you ask, what's the mission of your organization? Of your larger organization. I don't know. What are the strategic business objectives that you're working on? Don't know those either. What's keeping your boss up at night?
There you go.
What's keeping your boss's boss up at night? And I think there's some due diligence on our side that I think if we start looking at finding their sources of pain, we can go into some of these ROE discussions with those potential ideas that they would find value in. And even if our draft doesn't hit exactly what they want, there's going to be enough there for them to get an idea of how we can help in a valuable way.
That's a great idea. And what else we can do is we can get what we can from them, and we can look at what the mission and the vision of the company is and what the strategic goals are. And we can even present a plan to them and say, all right, you've asked for leadership. Here are 6 different possible outcomes that we believe this leadership program can accomplish if the business partnership model is in full play. Which of these would be most important to you? We pull these right out of the strategic plan. And at least we can present them with something, and then they tell us. And, that I think that's a good way to do it, and give them something to react to rather than just ask them open-ended. And another thing that this is a pet peeve of mine, is the term learning objectives. So often you take a program like leadership, and even if we've done a needs assessment, the learning objectives do not reflect the intent of the program. The learning objectives stop at level 2. This is what you're supposed to learn. Gee, I could almost just make paper airplanes out of those, rather than including performance objectives and business objectives for those mission-critical programs so the student can see where they're supposed to go, what they're supposed to do, and how they're supposed to become a Brunei window washer. And so that's just a kind of a tip here, no extra charge, to take a look whenever any of you are involved in instructional design and learning objectives. Boy, just be careful of that word learning, because it keeps us behind the door of level 3. That's just a caution.
one of the things that we stress is that when we write objectives, they're focused on the job. So behaviors on the job, conditions on the job, outcomes that exemplar performers meet on the job.
I'm not surprised to hear that. Very good.
Jim, I want to thank you so much for spending your time and sharing your expertise with us. And we really appreciate your being here. People have your website information.
Good.
May they feel free to follow up with you in terms of any questions they may have?
Yes, yes, they surely can. And I think we've got a number of, I'll tell you, the cement is wet on this Kirkpatrick stuff too. We're making it up as we go, you know, and I hate to admit that, but we're basing it not just on Wendy and I sitting and Don sitting around the dinner table, but we're out there with so many different organizations and so many groups. I just got back from Iran, you know, working 4 days with their national oil company, and everywhere I'm learning what the barriers are, but I'm learning how people overcome them and stretch themselves into the other side of the island. And we're just writing as fast as we can, and we're hoping that we're helping to create ambassadors that are multiplying the effort as fast as possible, because, you know, our book is called Training on Trial, the urgent need to meet the needs of the business, or something like this, but I'm not even sure the name. But we sure appreciate you guys not necessarily promoting Kirkpatrick, but promoting the business partnership model and rewriting a legacy for our industry. And it was my pleasure to be with you guys.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Okay. Good talking to you, Steve.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye now. And with this, we conclude our webinar, and thank you all for being here. Thank you very much. Goodbye.